this is the book that he's talking about, and we do have a few copies still in the bookstore. This photograph of the memorial was taken by Greg Lehman, who is the staff photographer for the Union Bulletin, and he did a really nice job for us. And I'm going to, might as well just go ahead and give this to you, because this will kind of help you follow along with our story. And these are free. This was the forerunner to the book. This is what we worked on to kind of test the waters, so to speak, to see how things were going to shape up. The original idea for the book and for this actually came during the building of this monument. Have you folks had are you from here? Okay, so you've probably had a chance by now to go look at the World War II monument up close. It is loosely patterned after the one in Washington, D.C., but we had to be real careful not to have any of the elements recognizable, because the one in Washington, D.C., that design is patented. So we came up with this one, and it has three pieces to it because it represents the air, land, and sea campaigns. And then, like Gruber said, on the base of each of the three are the names of the 93 from Walla Walla County. And their names are in the back of the book. It's listed as roll call, and it has the page number on which they appear in the book. Most of the stories are fairly, the biographical part of it is fairly short, and like he said, it's all set against the backdrop of the battle in which each of these men perished. And I went back, while we were working on this, I got curious. I thought, well, 93 of anything from anywhere sounds like a really big number. So I went back and looked at census information, and in 1940, the city of Walla Walla only had 18,000 people in it. So that's a much bigger ratio than I was aware of. And during the research for this, we actually discovered two more names. We started out with 91, and fortunately, before everything was finished, we were able to get the other two names merged in there. So that's kind of the background to it. And this pedestal that's in the middle right here does have all the emblems that represent the different components, the Army, the Navy, and Marine Corps, and not the Air Force, because that didn't come along until a little bit later, but Army Air Corps was their predecessor. And the monument itself was built with local donor dollars, so that makes it real special to us. And the supplement that you have right there, we did with Andy Porter and the man who was the editor for the Union Bulletin at the time. And Andy and I just kind of kicked around some different aspects. He wanted to figure out a series of ways that he could help with the fundraising for the monument itself. And that process went on literally for years. That was, what did we finally figure out? 6 years, basically. The better part of 6 years it took to raise the money to build that monument. So Andy stepped up, and he would publish the list of the casualties as that list changed, because we started out with the Department of Defense list, and then I went through each one and checked those against other sources and verified whether or not that man actually had lived in Walla Walla at one time before he was deployed. Now, the reason some of them got on the Washington list or even the Walla Walla County list is because they may have enlisted here, because before World War II, or even the beginning of World War II, you'd have to go to either Portland or Seattle or Spokane or some other far-flung place in order to enlist. Well, then somebody got the bright idea that we're missing a whole possible bunch of people, so let's set up a recruiting station in Walla Walla. They've got an armory right there. Let's just do that. So a lot of the men who got on that county list who perished during the war, actually their only connection to Walla Walla was they came here to sign up and then went back to their home. So that was a little bit confusing. So that brought up a lot of research through city directories, all kinds of other local resources in order to verify those names. That part of the research process took quite a bit of time, almost as much as the actual searching for biographical information. Most of that came from census records and other various sources. And then my husband worked on the battle portion of it, and while I was working on the biographical part, then he would, once we determined which unit or ship or outfit that the serviceman belonged to, then he would take that information, try to find out more about what they were doing at the time that this man died, and then we would also expand that out just a little bit to the major battle area. So once we had all of that information, we had to be careful not to go overboard, because it's real easy to do, especially for the men who died on Iwo Jima, or all the men who died in the Philippines, or all the men who died in during the D-Day campaign. It was difficult to make sure we didn't go too far afield on that, because there are entire books written about individual battles. So the purpose of the book was for the people, not necessarily as another history book about World War II, because we wanted to narrow the focus down so that it was just about our people. So that's kind of how that began to come together. Then we had to come up with the idea of whether or not we were going to just make this one long alphabetical list or one long chronological list. But as we continued with the research, it began to fall into place. The most logical way to arrange the information would be according to the theater of operation. And there were 4 of them. There was the European theater, Mediterranean theater, the Pacific theater, and the China, Burma, India theater, which most people don't know too much about, but we actually lost a couple of men in that theater of operation as well. So then within each theater, then we tried to arrange everything chronologically, because we kept trying to put ourselves in the place of the intended audience for this. So if somebody who didn't know anything about this, if they were to pick up the book, how are they going to approach it? What are they going to be looking for? How would they do that? So that's why the table of contents that pretty much fell into place. So you'll be able to see when you go look at the book that it starts out with the Pacific theater, because that's where we lost the most men, and then there's a few battles listed under there. Then it goes into some of these others. Now the only exception to that chronological rule would be the stories about the 6 POWs that we lost. Most of them were lost in Japanese prisoner camps, but not all of them. So we decided to take that body of material and put it in its own separate chapter. And then toward the end of the book, there's also another category about the stateside losses, because that seemed to be kind of a category of its own, because these men were in training, or they were accidentally killed in some freak accident and never were deployed. They were in a unit that was scheduled to go but never made it. So we have those guys that are separate. Then we couldn't figure out, for the longest time at the very beginning of this, we didn't have very many pictures of these men. And a good history book is only as good as its pictures. That's usually what people look at first. So we began to put together a few of those, and it wasn't until one of our volunteer editors, we had 3 of them, Groover was one of them, and a couple of other volunteer colleagues here did that for us. Let's see if I could find that one. Some of these young men, they just look like movie stars. They're so young. We had 3 of them that were 18, and the oldest man to die was 52. That was Captain Rooks. So the average age of these losses was like 25.4 years. It was just incredible. So it wasn't until Kathy Stritzel went down on her own to Penrose Library. She and I had already spent quite a number of sessions looking through yearbooks, city directories, and whatnot. We were doing the verification that I told you about. She decided to go down and look through all of the microfilm old UB articles. So she asked the clerk down there, she said, I want to see everything that was published during World War II. And he goes, everything? Yes, I want to see it all. And she would come back with a stack of pages that they had copied for her, many of which had a picture, thank goodness. So some of these are not real clear, but they're in pretty good shape. And we had one that was literally the size of a postage stamp. We found it in the Waitsburg Times. It was a young man from Waitsburg that perished, and they published a little bitty article and had a little tiny picture about him. And others we found were 8x10s that family members loaned to us so that we could make a copy of it. Well, so that brought up another whole thing, is these are all different sizes, all different quality and whatnot. How are we going to get these to where they're not only workable in its original state to go with the manuscript, but then how is that going to translate when the company gets ready to actually print the book? Well, we took it to the young man who owns a Calico Copy here in town, and he did some beautiful work on it. As a matter of fact, I'll let you take a look at this later if you want to. Yeah, he did a beautiful job on it. So now they're all the same size and remarkable quality. So we have those, and that's called the Gallery of Heroes, I believe. Yeah, so that prefaces the whole book, kind of sets the pace for it. So we started researching all of these guys and just then started merging our notes. So my husband and I started merging that information and then started building the manuscript for it. And then by that time we had already contracted with a company called Outskirts Press in Colorado. They're a fairly small company, but they gave us a real good package deal on it. And this is the photograph that Greg took. This is what they came up with, was this really nice piece here. It really sets the whole thing off. So that brings us down to the question that Ella asked, is she wanted me to not only talk about the content of the book, but then to go into the research portion of it, or the nuts and bolts of how the book was put together, because I've done this presentation a couple of times at the museum and other places around town, so a lot of people have heard the story, but she thought people might be interested in how you put together something like this, because obviously there's a lot of moving parts, there's a lot of information, it all needs to be focused into one spot eventually in order to put together a nice product. So we started out with Ancestry.com. A lot of you have probably used that for your own personal use. And there's a spin-off to that that's called Fold3.com because Ancestry evidently was getting so many inquiries about people looking for their ancestors who happened to be veterans. So they just started this whole new website that's just called Fold3.com, and that comes from the trifold flag that's presented to a family. And it contains, it's a little frustrating to use, but it does contain some information that you can't find on Ancestry. But you have to know quite a bit of information about the person that you're looking for, whereas Ancestry, you just give them any kind of a hint, and they'll eventually come up with quite a bit of information for you. So you have to kind of balance the two. But if you do get a hit on Fold3.com, it can be very, very useful. Another one that's very similar to Ancestry.com is Family Search, which was founded by the Mormon Church. And as far as I know, I haven't been back over there since the pandemic, but at one time they were open quite a number of hours a week, and they have people in the room that they've got set up, just has a bank of computers in it, and they have some of their volunteers that will come in and be there. So in case somebody wants to come do some family research, they'll help you use the computer and navigate through their website. And they were very helpful. They got me started on that, but like I said, I have not been back over there, so I don't know if they have reopened that service or not. Findengraved.com is another one. That one has, the nice thing about that is that it not only has the basic information of birth date, death date, but burial date, where the person was born, where the person died, and where they are buried, which necessarily aren't necessarily the same thing. And then most of them will also have a photograph of the headstone or the monument or the mausoleum or some other information. Sometimes you'll find a scanned version of the obituary that was printed for that person. Now, the nice thing about Find a Grave is that anybody can submit information to that. So if you have a family member and all you see up there is a picture of the headstone, well, okay, that's workable, but we have some other things. We actually have a picture of the medal or the ribbon bar that was on his uniform, or we have a photograph of him in his uniform, so they can submit that. And one of the other spin-off projects that I've been involved in out at Mountain View Cemetery is, as I'm doing the research for another huge project that I'm doing with the Reserve Officer Association here in town, we are going through the cemetery one grave at a time, all 40,000 of them, and trying to verify whether or not some of those who don't have government headstones are in fact veterans. And if they are, we're putting them on a master sheet of inventory that will eventually be put on the cemetery website. So we got involved with Find a Grave that way. So when we're doing our research to try to fill out our roster, if we don't see that there is a photograph on Find a Grave, then we make note of that, and then we go back and take a picture of it and submit it. Or if we find out that for whatever reason Find a Grave still has missing information or incomplete information, then we can submit that too. So that's been kind of a nice thing for us to get involved in. I mentioned Penrose Library. They were very, very helpful down in the archive room. We went through city directories, WWII annuals, the yearbooks for Whitman College, and anything else that they could think of. And we'd be sitting there working on stuff, and then here would come one of their staff members, and they would have a file box, and they'd go, "You might want to look at this because this has got some other type things in it." So they were very helpful, and we garnered a lot of information from them. Unfortunately, I did not have much luck getting things from the public library system because I don't live in Walla Walla, and to buy a library card was cost prohibitive for me. So I took that same amount of money and I went to bookstores, which was a lot more fun anyway. And I purchased quite a number of books so that we would have our own personal library. And that way we wouldn't have to worry about getting a book back or looking for a book that's checked out by somebody else. So we just built our own little personal library so that we could do the research, because we wanted to be as accurate as possible, even though we were kind of skimming the highlights of some of these battles and some of the information that's in here. We wanted what we put in here to be as accurate as possible. So we had everything from books that identify different types of aircraft to individual books on particular battles and whatnot. So that worked out very well for us. One of the obstacles that we ran into, which was completely unexpected, you'll see that in the back of this is a huge, huge bibliography. We were very, very careful about making sure that everybody that we got information from got credit for it. But the maps were a whole different situation. We had a lot of trouble getting permission to use maps. Google Earth worked out pretty well with a couple of them, but ones, if you just call up on the internet to look for a map of Okinawa or a map of the island of Leyte in the Philippines, you'll find there'll be a whole screen full of them. But to get permission to use some of those was extremely difficult and took a lot longer than getting permission to use a map that we found printed in one of the books that we had. And sometimes the limitation on using a map was because their access, they limited up front, and they would just tell you accessible only by, and they wanted to make sure that it was professors or serious researchers that were using their maps for whatever reason. So that cut down on a lot of it as well. So we had to overcome that. We finally got so frustrated trying to come up with a map of one of the most important battles, and that was the Battle of Sunder Strait, in which we lost Captain Rooks from Rooks Park. It was named for him. Could not find a copy of that particular battle that we could get our hands on. So we went to Google Earth, and I had my son-in-law who lives in New York. He's got a device called Team Finder, so he can manipulate things on my computer screen, and we had a conversation back and forth. He brought up the map, the basic map on it, put it on the screen, and then asked me what I needed. And so then he went to another site and loaded little tiny drawings of little battleships, and he put those in a couple of key places. I told him, just gave him the Reader's Digest version of what the battle, because it was huge, and it was fought fairly soon after Pearl Harbor. This was a very key battle. Things could have gone completely differently if the outcome of that battle had not gone the way it did. So he managed to also draw, he said, well, what kind of lines do you want on here? We can make straight lines, we can make wide lines, we can make dotted lines. So he took a strip of dotted little dots together and actually bent those through Java Strait and into Sunder Strait, which would have been the path of the warships, and then put a nice label on it, and that was the map that we used. And so he's in the bibliography for drawing that map for me. So that was pretty extreme. Thank goodness we only had to do that with one map. But you know, when you get that far into a story, like I said, you want to make it as accurate as possible. And because of that, and because of the printing cost, we don't have as many maps or drawings of any kind in here. There's one for each, basically one for each major section, one for each chapter. Now you would expect to find more than that in a book like this, and believe me, we wanted to have more than that, but it just didn't work out. So, and then in order to control all that information, or keep track of it, I should say, because there would be no way that I would be able to remember all that stuff. So, how did I do this? Yeah, here we go. So this was on the wall in the room where I worked for quite a period of time. This is the flow chart. This has all of the men that we were writing about, and it has all of the basic information. So if I'm going back to double check on something, but I can't remember, was he in the Army Air Force or was he in the Army Reserve? So I'd go back and look. So this has all the basic things that you would expect to find, the name, rank, and what component he was in, and then his unit or ship that he was in. We referred to that part quite often. And then the battle in which he was killed, the cemetery in which he is, if he is at all. Some of them are not. Some of them were lost at sea. And then the date of death and the status. Was he KIA? Was he missing in action? Did he die of illness, or did he die of an accident, a plane crash? And then, of course, the date of birth. That was a curiosity that I added on there because I began to see how very young these men were, and I got curious about that. So I started adding their birth date on here as well in order to calculate that. And toward the back of the book, there is, there's another page here that's called Personnel by the Numbers. And it was just something that I thought people might find interesting. Of the approximately 3,800 men and women from Walla Walla County who served during World War II, 93 lost their lives. And then I made a chart based on the service of each. So I wrote down, now here's Army, National Guard, Army Reserve, Corps of Engineers. So there's how many officers, how many NCOs, and how many enlisted men. And then I did that for the Air Corps, even though that's part of the Army. And then all the guys that were in different elements of the Navy. And they ranked from private or seaman to Navy captain, and that would be Captain Rooks. Then I collected some other things, like the first man to die. We lost him literally from day one. Seaman First Class Willard LaSalle from Dixie. went down on the Arizona. The last casualty was a young man from College Place, Staff Sergeant Thomas Thompson. He was killed in a plane crash over Billings, Montana. There were about 24 people that were men who were getting ready to either be reassigned or be discharged from the military, and they flew them from Europe, landed in New Jersey, and then put them on, because all the military planes were someplace else, they put them on a commercial airline and flew them. They were supposed to go to McCord Air Force Base for their final paperwork and whatnot. They ran into a snowstorm in December over Billings, Montana. How odd. Well, that was a real bad deal for them, because the plane went down, immediately killed 19 of them, and some of the men died later, including Staff Sergeant Thompson. 4 men actually survived that whole thing, but that was the last loss, and this was December 8th, 1945, right at the very end of the war. Like I said, there were 6 of them that were POWs. 23 of these 93 men were married. 2 of them were already widowers. 1 of them was single with dependents. 12 of these men already had children. Some of them never got to see their child because they were killed while they were still overseas. 8 of them were the only son. 5 of them were the only child. Now all of that has changed since then. 5 families had 4 in the military. 1 family, including Sergeant Thompson's, had 5. He was one of 6 brothers. 5 of the boys served. The other one was a Seventh-day Adventist minister. Their ages ranged from 18 to 50. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 of them were 18 years old, and then Captain Rooks was the oldest. 25.4 years old was basically their average age. So then the other part of it, the other part of keeping track, I did, as we began to gather information, we still had some gaps. So I made another chart that was similar to the main chart, and this was the shortfalls. And this still stands today. I still have these little pieces were still missing when we published the book. At some point, hopefully, we'll have to publish some kind of a little addendum, a little pamphlet or something to go with it, because the research on that never stops, and I come across new information from the most unusual places from time to time. So, and I've got another file that's been started on that. As far as the background part, the battle part, I mentioned that my husband looked, first of all, at trying to find information about the unit or the ship on which the person served, and then used that as a springboard to kind of branch out. Now, we found out that there are quite a number of units that have, I guess for lack of a better term, maybe kind of like an alumni association, like you would find old classmates and whatnot from your particular college. Well, a lot of the organizations, especially in the Air Force, they'll have the 505th Bomber Group Association, and then they'll collect information that people send them, and they'll publish their own website. So we found a lot of information that way, including copies of aircraft accidents. That was how we found out how we lost some of these pilots, especially the ones in the European theater. So that was a real big boost for us. I also found some very useful information over here in the museum library when I started working on the chapter for the POWs, because one of those was Anthony Lloyd. We have beautiful exhibits here from the Lloyd family. Both of their sons served in World War II. One of them did not come back, and I found quite a bit of information on the Lloyd family here. For a while, when we still had World War II things out here, there was a beautiful little replica of the USS Houston, which was Captain Rooks's ship. And it had exquisite detail on it. And it was very helpful to come double check information that we had found about the last minutes of the Houston before it was sunk, to come look at that little replica, and it made a whole lot of sense. And it was an absolute fluke how he died, because he was walking along back and forth along the deck, giving orders to his officers, and at some point he had to give the order to abandon ship, knowing that if anybody made it to the nearest land, which they could see from the ship, that they would probably be picked up by the Japanese and taken to a POW camp, but it was better than going down. So he was walking back and forth checking on things, and when he walked between two of the stacks, a mortar shell came through, right through the middle, and killed him instantly. So he was not able to finish his job, but by that time the ship was pretty much done for anyway, because it was hit several times. And so it was nice to be able to look at that little replica. That was a lot of help. Some other difficulties that we had during research was just the gaps in our particular background, because both of us are veterans, and we come from a family that has a military tradition in it. My father and three of his brothers and one brother-in-law all served in World War II, but I have ancestors that fought in the Civil War. I have a grandfather that fought in World War I, and there's a couple of other cousins who served in Korea, and I think I'm the only Vietnam-era veteran in the family, but military service is a big deal. Excuse me. So one of the things in going through here, because all the relatives that we have all served in the Pacific Theater, so we're a little bit more familiar with that. So when we got to studying about some of the other areas, we found that there was a gap in our knowledge base. So we had to do some ramp up on that part so that we could more clearly understand what we were writing about, because you do find, if you've done any kind of research on any kind of topic, you know that if you've got 3 sites that you're looking at, there's going to be variances in those, and we found a lot of that. So you have to put those together, string them together so that they make some sense. But if you find conflicting information, then that has to be documented as well, to say, well, according to current sources, we've found this. However, another reliable source states that. So we had to kind of be careful not to get too far out in the weeds on that sort of thing, but you want to make sure that you are reporting this as correctly as possible. And then, of course, the younger soldiers, there wasn't much information about them because they hadn't been around long enough for information to be submitted to some of these sites, because Ancestry itself does not have a research team that goes out and ferrets out all of the valuable information they have. A lot of it comes from existing government documents, like their enlistment record, the state death certificate, death index, all the census records, all of those things that they could get, but other things that families can supply them with, just like they do on Fold 3 and Find a Grave. So that was a little bit difficult, and so we just stated that if we didn't have much information other than the year that the person was born, we just say that currently not much information is known about his childhood or about his life until he enlisted in the Army Air Force on such and such a date. So you just put that in there. And I did mention that Outskirts Press from Colorado was our publisher. And let's see, I think that's probably about it. Do you have any questions about anything on this? It was a great adventure. We've never been involved in anything that covered this kind of information at all. Yes?
What was the most surprising source? You said you had a few weeks.
Oh, the most surprising source? Oh, I left out probably the most important source. Thank you for bringing that up. One of the big outcomes from this, and these, when you get a chance to look at the photographs in here, Andy Porter and the editor found all of these in the National Archives, and they're beautiful. A lot of the pictures I had never seen before. But one of the things that Andy did was try to print something every few weeks in the paper while we were still doing the fundraising, and he would publish the casualty list so that if anybody still knew anything about any of these men, that they could contact him, and then he would pass the information on to me, and then I would contact the family member or somebody who knew this individual, maybe a former classmate when they were still here at WWII. And I would say that was definitely the most valuable source, probably the most surprising, because I did not expect to hear from very many people. And for a while, they came out of the woodwork. I eventually had a contact list for over 24 families that saw the name of a cousin, a great nephew. I actually talked to 2 siblings that were still around. Orrin Page's brother is still here. Francis Freese's older sister still lives up Kapiai, and other various people. It was amazing. It was really, really amazing, and they gave me so much information. One lady had me come over to her house. She knew of she recognized a couple of the names, but she said, my mother has scrapbooks that she put together just to have something to do. You might want to look at those. She brought out 4 of these huge, they were originally photo albums, so they were the great big ones that are spiral bound and had the manila paper in the middle. She had those packed. Every square inch was covered with some kind of either little announcement or most of it was newspaper articles, just anything that she found that was interesting. Could be a birth announcement, could be the opening of a new store, could be some special event that some organization had. And scattered throughout those 4 scrapbooks were articles about our soldiers, and a lot of them with a photograph. So she handed me a little stack of the little bitty Post-it notes, and she said, mark the pages that have stuff on it that you want. And her husband took the scrapbooks and made a copy of those pages for me so that we could incorporate those. I would say that was probably the most stunning. And of course, all of those people got a complimentary copy of the book once we got it all finished. And a few of them were actually able to come attend the dedication to the monument that we had on Veterans Day of 2018. So, yeah, that was pretty fantastic. Yeah. Okay. Anything else? I do have some other random information up here for you. I did make a copy of the resources that we used, if that's of any interest to you. I brought information about flag cases that the American Legion sells. If you have a flag that was on the coffin of a veteran and you now have that displayed in your house, but you don't have something nice to put it in, I have some information on that. If you need a new flag for your house, I have information from the American Legion on that. This one you might find especially interesting. This is a sample of one of the little items that there's a subsidiary of the Veterans Affairs Department. They come in 2 different sizes, and all of them say veteran at the top, and then at the bottom they'll put down what component the person was in. Those were especially designed to put on a civilian headstone. So if the person did not order one from the government, but the family still wants them identified as a veteran, then one of those can be ordered. And I'm not sure why they arbitrarily picked that particular date, but any veteran who died after November 1st, 1990, the family can order one of these, and it will come free of charge. They will send it to you. And like I said, it comes in 2 different sizes. And it will either come with a set of bolts that you can have somebody put on for you, or it'll come with glue. And I thought the glue was pretty good until I came across one just the other day. I was looking for a particular tombstone that I needed to photograph for Find a Grave, and sure enough, the heat had been on that bronze headstone too many days last summer, I guess, because the little flag was kind of tipped a little bit. It was stuck tight where it is right now, but somehow that glue had kind of come loose. But they can be bolted to the headstone itself, because there's a trend now for a lot of people to be cremated and then have just one. I guess I'm not sure what they call it. It looks like it's a dual headstone. It's what it is, so that the wife's information is on one side, the husband on the other. Now, he may not be identified as a veteran, but with one of those he can. Now, if somebody has an ancestor who passed away before 1990, there is another company that will make one of those for you, and they look like the real thing according to the picture. You do have to pay for those, but they're not expensive at all. So that is an option for family members to later be able to identify their person as a veteran. And let's see, that one is. And then I also have some information here. If you have people that are buried in any of the local cemeteries, or even if it's not local, the information about the product that I use, and because that was a spin-off project, was that 41 of the 93 county casualties are buried at Mountain View. There's 3 of them in Waitsburg, there's 1 in Prescott, and there's 1 at Mount Hope. So every year, those guys all get their headstone cleaned, along with a long list of other people for various reasons. But I use the D2. It's a product that was designed specifically for natural stone. You can try to scrub this floor all day long and it won't touch a thing. But if you use it on any natural stone, whether it's marble or granite or any of the other things that mausoleums and monuments and headstones are made of, it doesn't work instantly. It's not like taking 409 or something and getting all the mold and the moss and the other things that will corrupt a headstone. It's not immediate because it is a biologic. It works at the cellular level on the things that will eventually destroy a headstone. So it takes a while for you to be able to see the result of it, but it works very well. And you can walk through Mountain View right now, this weekend, while all the beautiful flags are out, and you'll be able to look at a row and tell which ones have been cleaned, because they are remarkable, especially the Spanish-American section and the Civil War section, because we had some help from the brand new College Place Lions Club. They wanted a community project, and I said, oh boy, have I got a deal for you. And they came out last Memorial Day, and they spent some time cleaning all of the headstones in the Civil War section, and they look beautiful. They're really, really nice looking. So it really does work. I've been using it for a few years now, well, since I've been working on this project, and it works very well. It's not terribly expensive. It's not a concentrate. It comes in nice big gallon jugs. I have to order it directly from the company. I haven't found anybody else who sells it. You can't go to Home Depot or Lowe's or any place like that, but they will ship it to you. And a little does go a long ways, and it's not even a difficult process. You have to follow the directions on it, but it is not difficult at all. The one big drawback is you need a good water source, so I have to wait until they start irrigating at the cemeteries, so I can bring my hoses and hook those up to the standpipes, and then be able to have that without having to haul water. So I've got that information here. I also have some of my contact cards if anybody wants to take that, and if you think of something later you want to contact me. I brought the box because that's what I've got all of the files stored in. They're wound up with 3 of those before it was all over, and that just worked really well because I could pick those up and move them around from place to place in the house. We just bought a set of the little hanging files, and then there's a separate folder for each man and all of the information we collected on him. And I'm amazed at how many times I still have to go back and look up something for various reasons. I also help with tours out at Mountain View, and we have one coming up on June the 4th. So I'm always asked to highlight some veterans that are buried in Mountain View. So I'll go back into my file and I'll find guys from World War II. I'm going to highlight a couple of them from the Korean War, because we're now working on a book about those casualties. There's only 15 of them, so it's going to be a smaller book. But it seems to be taking longer for me to get to that than I did on this one, but it's okay. There's no rush. There is going to be a monument built to honor those Korean War veterans, and it'll be put up in Veterans Park in College Place. It's still at the quarry. We hope to have it this spring, but they made a mistake. They misspelled somebody's name, and Tony Puglisi, who owns Heritage Memorials, is the guy who designed the monument, and it's stunning in its simplicity. It's going to be very, very attractive. I think you'll like it when you see it. He got the proof back from the engraver. They were so proud. Oh, we got this. It's all ready to go. And he goes, no, you misspelled the guy's name right in the middle, Billy Dutton. I'm not sure how they missed that, but they did. So they're going to make good on it. They came up with some genius plan that Tony didn't like the looks of. He thought it would look tacky and it would look like a makeshift repair job. So he said, nope, I think you're going to just have to redo it. And they go, okay, fine, we'll just eat this project. So they got to make us a whole new monument, because I think what happened, there's a space between two of the letters instead of two parts of his name. So I don't know if somebody bumped the engraver or what happened, but something didn't go right, and it's real obvious. There's no way you can fix it, so they're going to build us a new monument for that. So, okay, that's pretty much it, unless you have a question of some kind. Feel free to go back and take a closer look, or I'll let you look at my copy here if you want to. They are on sale for $23.50 for members and $25 for non-members. So, is there somebody back there, or do you want them to come some other day and get a book?
I'll watch the store. So if
Okay.
anyone wants to purchase a book,
Okay.
I'll watch the store.
All right. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sherilyn.
You're welcome. Yeah. Thank you.